All right. Everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today's the 5th of September and we're coming to you from Chico, California. The first time joining us, welcome to the Lookout. Here's where we talk about forestry, fuels, fire, logging, living in the woods, prescribed fire, tools, whatever, all kinds of stuff. Tonight we're going to talk some more about the Teakettle project, about the Garnet Fire burning down east of Fresno. That fire's burned about 30,000 acres now, and it burned up one of the biggest old growth stands of timber that was still existing outside of national park lands in the Sierra Nevada. So it's a big bummer, and so we wanted to hear more about that. So I had did an interview this morning with Bethany Hanna and Scott Strabinsky. They've been tasked with managing this project to try to get this burn done. So we talked about what that entails, the process. I'm going to play that full interview at the end of the episode, but it's kind of long, and if you're really into it, we'll publish that on its own on the Lookout too. But it is interesting. I think just to recap, I'll jump in the map and we'll talk a little bit about what all happened here with that project. And we'll catch you up a little here on Garnet. This is the Garnet Fire. Garnet's burning down by Fresno. The blue areas are areas that have burned since 2020. And we got Fresno down here, and we got the High Sierra, and we got Lone Pine and Bishop on the east side over here. And kind of right in the middle of the Sierras here, kind of north of Kings Canyon, we've got the Teakettle in green, Teakettle Experimental Forest, and then this is the Garnet Fire. So Garnet started down here, and it burned out of the Kings Canyon down into the North Fork of the Kings, and then it, over the course of the last week and a half or so, burned up here, and it burned through the Sawmill Flat and through the Teakettle. And we've been sharing some imagery of that, of just the fire when it got there was really severe. And so I'm going to throw up an image here of that. This is an infrared image taken on kind of the peak of burning on the 2nd, which is 3 days ago. And the fire kind of made its way through here fairly dramatically. The days, on the 1st, it went about halfway through the reserve, and on the 2nd, it finished the job. We have talked a little bit about how, looking at the satellite imagery, that some of these areas out here where there are big trees, like there's still greenery out there. We don't know how much and like what proportion of that burn with high severity. One of our guests, Bethany, is going to go up in an airplane the next couple of days with Malcolm North, who's kind of the scientist that manages this reserve area, and they're going to have a better look at it. But what we know is that the fire ripped through Teakettle pretty good, which is kind of not surprising because it's, at the top of a huge kind of south-facing slope coming up out of really inaccessible California canyon lands. So, places like this, south-facing slopes, upper south-facing slopes historically have had high severity fire. Just that's kind of the landscape sets it up for fires to come cranking up out of the canyons, and also south-facing slopes get more sun, all day long in the summertime, so they're drier and they're hotter than north-facing slopes. So anyway, that's Teakettle. So basically the story is Teakettle got smoked. California Climate Investments Fund is a kind of a CAL FIRE grant program that I think the Climate Investment Fund is kind of bigger than CAL FIRE, but CAL FIRE has forest health grants that are funded by CCI that are supposed to kind of restore forest conditions that sequester carbon in old trees. And so you can see that a lot of carbon is being liberated here from the lignin bonds that have held it for hundreds and hundreds of years in old growth trees, and that stuff there is all headed into the global atmosphere. So we've talked a lot on here about how trying to store carbon in trees and flammable landscapes is kind of like really not panning out so well, and that this is what happens when you let bankers kind of decide forest policy, is that they do creative things like this, like spending $6 million to try to store carbon on a south-facing slope. Anyway, so what do we say about that? Basically, the fire ran the slope. The weather changed. I made a smart-ass reel about how the team should stop being so optimistic because the fire was going to do what it wanted. And then since then, as is typical when I make pronouncements and predictions of what's going to happen, I was like, you're not going to hold it on the road until it runs out of gas or the weather changes. Weather changed, and so far they're holding it on the road, which is this is not a super what you'd call sure bet that they're going to hold it on this road system, but they've had a couple days of good weather. So what we see here on the infrared from 1 o'clock today is that the firefighters they did a bunch of prep on this McKinley Grove Road, and now they've put fire on it over the last couple of days. And so the fire has been cooperating, and they've kind of basically done some prescribed fire type firing here under the kind of more beneficial conditions. And so if we look at where the fire was, say, yesterday, they've kind of continued to fill in that firing operation. If you look at where it was on the 3rd after the big run, they started getting some firing done here. Maybe the 2nd, night of the 2nd. When was this flowing? This is flowing right after midnight on the 3rd. So they started getting some firing on the ground. Basically, the fire charged up out of here, and we see that on our satellite imagery. And then pretty much it hit the top of the slope. We had that crazy thunderstorm day. It rained here a little bit, and then it's kind of been capped. It's been kind of under a bunch of layers of smoke. Someone's asking if closed captioning can be enabled, and it will be enabled if you go and watch it on YouTube after it's no longer live. But I haven't figured out how to make it work for live. Okay, so anyway, yes, fire got capped with smoke last couple of days, and firefighting is all about seizing opportunities when they present themselves. So they've had this opportunity to put a bunch of fire on the ground and try to contain the fire within this kind of box of the road that they've prepped over the last week. It might work. The difficult thing here is just that it's mid-slope. So, while they have the good conditions, they're trying to get depth on this. But, one of the things they're doing here that's kind of pushing them is the fire is established down here in Dinky Creek. And it's not out of the question that it may eventually get here. And so they want to have this road well secured and like a lot of depth on their firing before that, because if they just stopped firing right now and the firing was this deep, you can see today's growth, 24-hour growth or 12-hour growth basically down in here. And the fire is going to want to kind of continue doing its thing up below the 24 road here. So say, in a couple days, if the fire is established out in here, if it did end up making a run up out of Dinky Creek and hitting this, they really need a nice big solid catcher's mitt. So they want their firing operation up there to, you know, look more like this. Like they want to get all this kind of filled in, ideally, before the fire comes up out of Dinky Creek. And so we've talked a lot about firing operations and just how they're risky. Oftentimes that's how we control big fires. But going out here and putting all this fire on the ground, once you put it on the ground, you kind of own it. And if we have a big windstorm or conditions change or big thunderstorm outflows or something, you know, it's not unprecedented that you end up getting the fire over the line in a place that the fire might not have ever got there, you know, if you hadn't put the fire on the ground out here. So this is one of the things that is kind of like, now that we have watch duty and infrared and people like me telling these stories, most of this kind of tactics has been happening for dozens of years, forever. As long as we've been fighting fire, we've had firing operations. But now that it's kind of, we can kind of see it unfold in near real time, it opens up this dialogue. And a lot of the teams aren't used to the public really having any specific input or comment on their tactics, because in the past, no one's really known what they're doing out there. Anyway, this is what they have to work with. And so they're putting fire on the ground, and I'll be curious to see, you know, they've got McKinley Grove out here that's Sequoia Grove, and they obviously don't want the fire to come running up out of here, out of Dinky Creek, and nuke the grove. Sequoias have evolved with, you know, millions of years of fire, but we've had fire suppression for a century and not a lot of fire history in here. And what we've seen in past fires in this area is that when you have a head fire that runs up out of, you know, when you have a mid-slope grove and a head fire hits it on a day like we had the other day, it's really hard for those ginormous trees to survive that, even though they, you know, are the most fire-adapted trees in the world. So, so that's kind of the current status of this fire, is that they're doing a lot of work up here on McKinley Grove, and they've been prepping that for a week. And the fire is kind of out of their control here above Balch Camp in Dinky Creek. And it's in this terrain where there's not a lot they can do. So they put a lot of energy into trying to hold the fire up here, kind of above Indian Rock going towards Ross Meadow. Over the past, you know, week at least, you know, and this part of the fire here hasn't moved for days. But it's going to kind of fill in anyway with the fire that basically the fire slopped over and it's continued to kind of roll out. And they're hitting this hard with, you know, scooper aircraft and helicopters. But a lot of, like, when we look at the webcams, this is 1 p.m. at Fence Meadow looking across at that ground. And you can see it's just socked in. So oftentimes people say, hey, how come they're not flying helicopters today? I'm looking on the flight tracker, and why aren't they flying? And it's oftentimes, well, they're not flying because they can't see. And so here at Fence Meadow, if we look at the last 3 hours, it cleared out. And you can see that over here where the fire's been active, it kind of made some good kind of slope-driven runs this afternoon. So the mapping we have of it is at 1 p.m. And this afternoon it's kind of cranked in there. And so when you kind of see through the smoke here, basically what's happening is this area that was on fire earlier in the day is basically probably burning out. Why is it doing that? It's probably burning out in here. So that's not a big deal in that this area is already contained by fire. The problem of this is just that these kind of head runs in the afternoon are high severity. And so it's going to be more destructive in here than it would be if the fire, you know, was going to back down through there. Another thing that's kind of interesting is up off this road system here, they're also putting fire on the ground here. Oftentimes, even if you're not going to contain a fire in one spot, if you put fire on the ground on the kind of upper slopes, it allows time for the, you know, they think the fire is probably going to get here. So by putting fire on the ground right now, it's going to allow for the fire to kind of back down this drainage here for the coming several days till the fire gets there. So that's the theory. That's the idea. And what that's going to do is that's going to increase the likelihood that the fire effects in this patch are beneficial, or as beneficial as you could hope for. But basically, they've got this patch here that they're afraid is going to come across the creek and head fire and then potentially spot over the road. And so by putting fire out in here, they're trying to kind of consume as much fuel as they can to keep the fire from having momentum, coming up out of here and spotting over the road where they've done all this work to hold it along this corridor. So there's just a lot of creative application of fire that happens. You know, another thing that was interesting to look at down here is that they put some fire on the ground in this area a couple days ago. I think with the same idea, basically. Let's see if I can find where we're thinking. It was kind of interesting to see it pop up there. Where was that? Might have been a virus shot. It's hard to keep track of all these different places, but I think you can see that they'd put some fire on the ground out in here, kind of the same idea, like get some backing fire out ahead of the main head fire a couple days ago. So their big goal right now is to not have the fire cross Dinky Creek and be engaged over here, and they've been prepping a big box, basically, that is like this whole ridge system. And I don't have that right handy. Let's see. Maybe we have it here. Right, here's our operations map. And so you can see that there's this box out here that they've been talking about that basically, I'll just draw it so we have it in there. The teams used to post all their fire line data to a website where the public can get these maps, and they've kind of gone to having all the mapping be online through like a single server that's hosted by the National Fire Center. And since they did that, they no longer post the fire line maps, which is a bummer for people like me, because you can only access that stuff now if you have a official login. And then if you have that official login, you're not supposed to share that stuff. And I think, well, you know, all this work that's going on, it seems kind of like it should be public information. But anyway, this is the box, basically, that they're prepping for contingency in case it does cross Dinky Creek. They've been working a ton on this box. So it may cross Dinky Creek, it may not. If it does, they may or may not keep it in this box, right? It depends on the conditions. The kind of good news in the big picture is that the weather's supposed to get cooler and moister in the near future, but who knows? This big fire, it's going to burn for a while still. So that's basically the tactics. They're also kind of having a bit of a struggle over here. They've got dozer line out in here, going up through here. And so they're hoping that they've been trying to use tankers and other stuff to try to slow the advance of the fire up into this country and pushing it over this dozer line over Rogers Ridge that would kind of then reestablish it in the North Fork of the Kings River. I guess that's the main stem Kings River. So this is still dynamic over here. The smoke is kind of shading out a lot of stuff, and so in general, it's been fairly slow spread the last couple of days. But this is the other kind of area that's most active of the fire. So you got the right flank is active, the top of the fire is active, and the left flank is kind of active by Indian Rock. So back to Teakettle. We've already talked quite a bit about this, so I'm just going to summarize my interview with Bethany and Scott, and then we'll look a little bit at fires on the Klamath, and then we'll play the whole interview with them. And I'll look at questions. Gerbot asks if I know if they're doing any night ops with the new Firehawks. Kevin says, if they don't burn the right bank of Dinky, isn't that super risky if it catches fire on its own? Jason Jimenez says that the research that shows we should store large carbon in large fire resistant trees came out of Teakettle and Malcolm North. All right. There's this question about why don't they light it off of Dinky Creek? We really don't like to light fire at the bottom of the mountain. Just because that, so the question is like, if they don't fire the bottom here of Dinky Creek, doesn't that make it more likely it's going to jump over? If you fire the bottom of the hill, you send head fire up the mountain, and it's really like the highest possible severity often. Kind of guarantees that you're going to nuke this out. Versus if the fire kind of flanks and backs, like I've got an image from today. And sometimes when these fires are backing, it doesn't kill every tree. So this is an image from yesterday. In kind of marked contrast to what we saw the previous image, where this was just all like red hot lava. You can see the fire kind of is just kind of little pockets of heat, and that this is a lot of the trees are likely going to survive this backing fire. But that's why we don't light the bottom of the hill, is that if we do, that whole landscape's going to be nuked. And you can see on the heat here of the fire kind of spreading slowly across, like compared to what we saw a few days ago. Like if you look at similar kind of visualization of when the fire was really running on the second, like you see the flaming front here is like, I don't know, over a mile. Like the flaming front was like over a mile wide at the peak of burning on the second. And so if you look at what it looks like now, like there's no flaming front. There's just like these little kind of, the flaming front is, 50 yards across or something. So yeah, if we light it at the bottom of the hill, likely we're going to have this big, wide, high intensity flaming front that's going to go up the hill, and it's going to really nuke this out. So if they can kind of let it come to them, it's hard to be patient, but it's just frowned upon basically. In the past, especially in Southern California, like you'd build your box and you'd fire out. And when you do stuff like that, all the animals out in here can get trapped. Deer, other animals can get trapped by that. So right now, when the fire is kind of slowly making its way across the landscape, it's easier for wildlife to get away. It's just, all in all, it's more natural. So yeah, we probably won't see them. If we do see them firing out in here, it's likely they're going to be using UAVs, drones, to kind of spot fire, dot fire around here with that goal of like, we want the fire to move through here on our own timing, but we don't want to nuke the stuff out. So I wish we had an infrared today showing the firing ops, because I think that'd be interesting to see, like, what does it look like? What's the patchiness of these firing operations? All right, so Bethany and Scott were here, and questions you guys had for them were, are they going to have to give back the money? Right? They got Climate Wildfire Institute got $5.8 million from the California Climate Investments Fund, and are they going to have to give the money back? They don't think they will. And we got over here on the lookout, we have a write-up on this, and I'll share the kind of project description here. This is kind of how they sold the project. Project will reintroduce fire to 3,200 acres of old-growth forest, restore its resilience, and stabilize carbon stores in the large trees. Before burning, the project implementers will remove snags and burn piles of dead wood adjacent to the control line perimeter roads surrounding the burn. It contains the largest old growth outside national parks, and within the last 8 years has nearly been burned by high severity fire from the Rough and 2020 creek fires, and last year, there was another fire at the bottom of the hill. So no, they don't think they're going to have to give the money back. They think they're going to be able to pivot and spend the money on something else that is similarly sexy to the funders, that involves trying to keep somewhere else from burning before, trying to burn something else before it gets burnt. Another question people had was, what were the obstacles? What were the hang-ups on this project that kept it from happening? Basically, it sounds like they got through the environmental permitting relatively quickly. It took them 2 years. They got the money 2 years ago. They were pretty much done with all their environmental surveys and starting to shop around contracts for people to cut down the trees, snags. And they'd already gotten a burn boss to write the burn plan. So I don't know how much of the money they've spent, but they are shopping around for other ideas of how they can spend that money. A question I had for them is, why did the Climate Wildfire Initiative get this money? Why? What was there anything specifically about them that made them uniquely qualified to manage a project of this complexity? And they're well connected. If you look at their website, they've got 7 kind of high horsepower professor types, and some lady that's really politically savvy. And then their advisory board is former deputy chief of CAL FIRE, former chief of Orange County Fire Department, and Bethany Hanna, who was on the call. So I think in a lot of ways, these guys they knew where to find the money. They had they liked the idea of the project. They support the project, and they got paid to try and do it. So you can watch the whole interview. We asked a lot. We didn't give them too many softball questions. I think you can make up your own mind what you think about how money gets spent. This is public money. How should we be spending money to fireproof forests? And is it even possible? Is it possible to, get big burns done in the current kind of dysfunctional state of the Forest Service, and in the dysfunctional state of the federal government? And what are the forces that don't want work to get done, etc.? So it's a deep conversation. I appreciate them coming on. I think, just personally, they're bummed, right? I talked to, I think one of the best quotes from the interview was Scott Sherbinski. I asked him about well, what's this like? It just feels to me like wrapping everything in this carbon banking wrapper is like total horseshit, and just a symptom of kind of advanced capitalism gone wrong, where like the bankers have to make their cut, the investors have to make their cut. We'll jump through all these weird hoops and make people do all these crazy surveys before we give them money that may or may not make any difference in climate change or global carbon balance or anything else. But I thought one of the best quotes and understandable sentiment from Scott was he went out there and looked at the project on tours, and he said that the last thing that he thinks of when he thinks of this project is carbon storage. He thinks of this amazing old growth forest, and that this was an opportunity to get money to try to do something to save it. And so they're not bummed that their carbon project got. None of the people involved in this project, besides maybe the funders, I think believe that carbon is the reason that we should be doing this stuff. They're doing this work because they believe that old growth forest is important. It has so many benefits for people. There's so much cultural significance. The native people here have so many of their world, is their stories about how to be in the world. Everything is tied up in these old growth forests. So carbon's a scam. People are taking advantage of it to try to do good work. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I think those are some of my takeaways. It'd be nice if we could just fund work like this, because old growth forests are awesome and everyone should care about them, and not just have to wrap it up and be like, well, we're saving the global climate by saving X number of metric tons of carbon that And the money from this comes from Chevron, right? So they're like, they have to give this money to the state, so they're allowed to put more carbon dioxide in the air out of their refineries in Benicia and Martinez, etc. So that's where all this money comes from. So we're playing with other people's money. We're all paying for it one way or another because gas prices go up so they can pay their carbon tax, blah, blah, blah. It's a really whack system. Jesus. Yeah, rake the forest. Mastication and clear cut. Well, that'll make it better. Yeah, for sure. You know, parking lots don't burn. You know, if you want to solve the mega fire crisis, just frickin' pave it all. And then no mega fires. I think, you know, I want some, if you are running a venture capital firm right now, looking to invest in wildfire solutions, give me a call. I got some ideas. But yeah, paving the forest, guaranteed, no more mega fire. All right. Right, and then someone's like, what about all the methane? Yeah, and so we got all these dead trees now. The carbons can be there for a long time, but then the methane from them decomposing is not a good thing either. So Ken on here is our local biochar evangelist. There's going to be a lot of biochar out here, brother. All over. Standing, laying down. All right. Pave the forest. Okay, so I don't have much more to talk about here on Garnet. And I've been realizing that the more I just run my mouth when I'm done with having stuff to talk about, more likely I'm going to say something really idiotic. And somehow you guys all come back. So, all right, I'm going to fly the map machine. Got a tip. We've got a fire that started down here in BFE near Coalinga during the lightning bust. This area burns all the time and no one cares. Like, literally. Like, there's been a lot of fire out here in Coalinga. They say Coalinga is like CAL FIRE's version of Happy Camp. You know, just... So anyway, Coast Range, really nasty. And so this fire here, they ordered a Type 1 team. This fire got going good during the lightning storm earlier this week. And basically the team is going to put a big box around it. They're going to find out where there's roads that they can fire off of. And they're just going to kind of back off and fire roads. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because this area has valley fever. And I don't know how many of you guys know about that, but valley fever is this kind of fungal infection that lives in the soil. And when you dig in the dirt and breathe the dust, you can get it, and it can just it's like COVID. It's these spores that end up in your lungs and kill you or make you extremely sick or cripple you. And so firefighter safety, you know, is a factor in a lot of the ways we do things. And so rather than like send a bunch of hand crews out into this godforsaken poison oak and chamise patch, they're going to look for places they can back off and fire off roads. Because we don't need a bunch of people getting valley fever just so we can like save this fire adapted ecosystem from itself. So, you know, a lot of the stuff doesn't get advertised, you know, and CAL FIRE usually is really adamant that they're going to like keep every fire as small as they can. They're not going to manage fire in the landscape. But firefighter safety is important, and sometimes even the big red machine uses indirect attack for reasons other than, you know, for reasons like not getting their people sick. So don't know exactly where this fire is at right now, what's new on it, but that's the skinny is indirect attack, and it's not doing much. The other lightning fires that happened all here, like pretty much these lightning fires barely have done anything since the day. You know, there was fires during the day on Tuesday. It was hot and hectic. There's still some heat in them, but like no new spread to speak of, like very minimal spread on any of these fires in the last 2 days. Nothing going on that we know of anywhere between there and the Klamath. And then yesterday, the blue fire kind of blew up, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But all in all, things are extremely quiet right now. Here's the blue fire with our kind of fire severity overlay. And we've got the red is today. Here's today's infrared, and then they mapped it. Cal Fire mapped it, and it's about the same. But where's our 4th? Something happened, and all my layers got juggled around somehow. But not a lot of spread on this fire either. Like if we look at the evening of the 2nd, wrong fire. Blue, 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 blue. Here's the 3rd. So it spread quite a bit since the 3rd, night before last. Let's try to make this less complicated to look at. You can see about this fire is that it's kind of spreading in the last 2 days. It's kind of spreading in all directions except where there's kind of road access. They don't really have plans to attack it directly until it gets out to the roads here. They're building some, they've kind of proposed mixed line up along Grider Creek, and then they've got contingency line on the adjacent watersheds. And potentially you could see them firing off of those if the fire does look like it's going to get across these ranges and come back up at them. But right now, they've been focusing a lot of their energy on setting up structure protection inside in anticipation that fire is going to make it down the hill and could potentially jump the river. Probably won't, but that's been a big emphasis. Is like, and we know that the fire's doing probably. We've already talked about what the fire's probably doing here for reburn, as far as ecologically, like cleaning up the 10-year-old burn. If you want to learn more about that and didn't watch it already, check out our interview from 2 days ago with Jamie Allen, who's the local guy who knows all about all this stuff. Dillon Fire over here also has kind of continued to spread farther to the east. And this morning, looking at Dillon, we've got our infrared, and then we've got kind of the perimeter of where it was. And so we talked about how they had done a firing operation out here, and they kind of held it to this ridge through here, and also how there was a recent burn that this fire is kind of running into on this side. Over here, where they're kind of outside of the previous burn, they've carried their firing ops out through here, and then at some point it looks like they kind of lost their firing op, or just, let's see. You got this road system here, and at some point, and they managed to hold the firing through along this road, but it looks like potentially they maybe lit the road here and it went up the hill on them. The thing about this country too is that like there's absolutely nobody living out in this country here, and so it's not getting like the night helicopters and other resources you would get if there was a town over here or something. But all you've got is like extremely remote backcountry and then actually into wilderness right up here. So that's basically Dillon. Some interesting stuff there to talk about with the firing, and we'll keep an eye on that over the next couple of days. Post Mountain did not get smoked like a reefer. All right. Pull the dragon out. Pave the forest. All right. Oh, man. Post Mountain did not get smoked. It will, though. Without a doubt. Post Mountain is going to get smoked. It's got it. It's got it written all over it. And not because they're growing a crazy amount of dope, but because they're on an upper south-facing slope in fire country. Like if you look at where Post Mountain is, over here, Hay Fork, Peanut, all this goofball shit. Post Mountain. If you look at Post Mountain and then you look at the fire history of the area, like what would make you think that, like, it's not going to burn? It's one of those places that's sitting in a bubble that hasn't burned for 100 years on a south-facing slope, with a huge number of goofballs running around doing shit like cutting firewood and riding dirt bikes and all the stuff that us hillbillies love doing. Like, it all involves friction one way or another. And that's how fires get started, is people out cutting firewood, people out driving their truck off the road, people, whatever. Us human hillbillies start fires. Sometimes on purpose, but usually just because, like, we were trying to arc weld with our jumper cables on our bumper because that seemed like a good idea. Whatever. Like, or our kids have been watching us play with fire. Like, I came out one day and my kid was 2 years old and he was trying to burn the kale in our backyard because he'd seen me burn some weeds. Kid's got a flaming stick from the fire and he's over trying to burn the kale. Anyway, that's how we pass on our culture, but it's also sometimes how we get in trouble. Call CPS. All right. Friction. Yeah, the whole valley's going to get baked. Insert your good weed jokes here. I guess this could be the week that we talk about Post Mountain every day. Compost Mountain. All right. So, I hate to leave you there hanging, but and I know, like, this conversation with Bethany and Scott is they're nice people, and it's kind of a boring topic, and that's why we're playing it at the end. But I appreciate them coming on. I appreciate their candor. I think they're cool humans, and that's about it. So let's cue them up, and I don't know what we're doing this weekend. I apologize for not having a more reliable schedule, but I also don't apologize. I'm self-employed, and we will get there. We will get there. We'll be more predictable someday, but probably not today. So without further ado, cue the banjos. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Lookout. If you've been following us this week, you know that we've been looking at the Garnet Fire burning in the southern Sierra down east of Fresno. And you know that the fire burned through 3,000 acre research forest that was supposed to get burned on purpose in a prescribed fire. Today we're going to talk with Scott Sherbinski and Bethany Hanna. They both work with the Climate Wildfire Institute, which is a nonprofit that had a grant from CAL FIRE to try to do this 3,000 acre burn. Throughout my career, I've been working in planning a lot, and I've got to say that very few of the major projects that I've worked on planning in the last 25 years have actually ever come to fruition. This stuff looks easy on paper, and when it comes down to it, putting fire on the ground at a large scale, between getting the environmental compliance done and then getting a burn window, and then actually having the resources or the political will for someone to, like, go ahead and let you light the match. It's really hard to get this stuff done. So we're going to talk with these guys about their experience with this project and what they think the future looks like for projects like this. Well, welcome to The Lookout, you guys. Thanks for coming on. I know you guys have had a really busy week. I was wondering if you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us how you came to work with the Climate Wildfire Institute.
Yeah, thanks, Zeke. My name is Scott Sherbinski. I'm a program manager for CWI. I've been with the organization for a little over 2 years now. Prior to that, I worked for the National Park Service for a long time as a wildlife biologist, and then worked with some nonprofits doing implementation work kind of up and down the Sierra and throughout the state of California and Nevada. So shortly after I started with CWI, we executed our agreement with CAL FIRE for the Teakettle project. It's a forest health grant for about $5.8 million to implement large-scale prescribed burn. And because of my background with implementation and handling implementation contracts, I was selected as the person on the team to kind of support and oversee moving that forward, that project forward.
I'm Bethany Hanna. I was the second employee at CWI, so really a part of the startup of the organization, and certainly the startup of the Teakettle. My background originally was in suppression. I spent 7 years with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and then through a very circuitous route, ended up in the nonprofit sector, and have always kind of circled around fire. But the Teakettle specifically, I was a part of the initial conversations when the Climate Wildfire Institute took on the project as originally the fiscal sponsor of the grant. But we very quickly stepped into the program management role, kind of restructured the initial vision, which is, this project is really led by Malcolm North, who is the lead researcher on the Teakettle Experimental Forest. And he's worked many, many years to get this going. So this is it's been a hard week in that sense. But I think Malcolm is very much a realistic kind of guy, and it's just saying, "Yep, this has always been a possibility." So, yeah.
Okay, so can you give us a little timeline on when you guys got funded and where you were in the process of, like, what was your expected timeline?
The grant itself, the timeline extended through 2029, and these grants have a pretty big buffer because I think the state is understands that the planning process can have all sorts of barriers and everything from weather to fire seasons to regulatory constraints. So the NEPA process takes a lot of time, and also the Teakettle is high enough that the snow comes in and the opportunity to do field work is shut down for a long period of each year. And so we ran up against that in terms of the timing. I mean, I was hopeful that we would be burning this next year.
Okay, so you mentioned that you guys were kind of in the NEPA process. Can you describe what kind of hoops you were going to have to jump through before you could start cutting down trees and digging fire lines?
Yeah, so when we started this project in August of 2023, some of the NEPA stuff was already being coordinated between Pacific Southwest Research Station, the Sierra National Forest, and Region 5 was also helping to support with some capacity. So those conversations and those processes were already in place when we started the project. So we got this decision memo signed at the end of last summer, 2024. And during that time, we had already started doing surveys for threatened and endangered species, specifically spotted owls. And then this spring, we started doing all our cultural surveys. They are wrapped up in the perimeter of the project. It's a 3,800 acre project in total, about 16 miles of fuel break around the exterior, and then one large burn unit in the interior. So all the surveys were completed. We had to do full floristic botanical surveys this spring and this fall, and those were largely ready to go. And we were just closing out an RFP to contract all the hazard tree removal and fuel related work around the perimeter, just as the Garnet Fire started. And then this past week, Monday, after this last weekend, when the fire progressed all the way through the project, we put a stop work order on all our contracts. But we were ready to go immediately. As soon as we get a contract signed, we're going to have boots on the ground doing.
Okay, so basically it's been about 2 years since you got the funding and you were pretty much through the planning process. I think one of the frustrating things for me as a kind of practitioner is that, like, we've got projects. I say we, it's the company I used to work for, Firestorm, has projects on the Tahoe that have been pretty much on the books for like 10 years and have either been held up because the Nature Conservancy, who was funding the work, lawyers got involved with the liability concerns, or there hasn't been a burn window. So there's been millions of dollars of implementation sitting for almost a decade just because of the hurdles that are faced after you get through the permitting. So you guys were at the first step, but there's no guarantee that you would have gotten a burn window in the next 5 years, right?
100%. And I will say that is another process that was really far along. We contracted a type 1 burn boss to draft the burn plan, and we were starting through this review of that with the forest and getting really close to buttoning that up as well. Again, the hopes in the kind of the trajectory we're on is that we would do the fuel break stuff this fall, do pile burning in the spring, and then do the broadcast burn in the fall of 26. But like you said, there's no guarantee of that. Burn windows, the clock is always ticking with wildfire. We went through this last year with the basin fire when that started kind of down below the project as well. We were really fearful of that fire doing exactly what the Garnet Fire did.
And who was your burn boss?
Ben Jacobs.
Yeah, so we had a burn with Ben in Calvera's Big Trees
Yeah.
2 years
2
ago,
years
3 years
ago.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was really similar to Teakettle in that we had crews out falling hazard trees for weeks. And one of our guys got killed. And I think
Right.
people forget that when you lay out a burn unit, like the burn boss ends up, like the burn boss says, "Hey, we're going to put the line here," and then someone goes and cuts that line, and they get killed by a snag, and that there's all these things that are as dangerous as wildland fire that
Yeah.
end up happening on prescribed burn prep. Um,
Yeah.
just to throw that in there for
Yeah,
keeping this stuff real.
yeah, and Zeke, I feel for you. I'm sorry to hear about that. And I'm sure you've been down around the tea kettle like that. It's no exception down there. Like the drought and the beetle kill damage to those big old trees. Like the snags are both the standing dead and the live unstable trees are a real issue up there. And that was going to take a lot of time and a lot of careful thinking to get through and make sure that those hazards are mitigated as we're going in. And I do think like some of the decisions that have been made, and I'm not a fire, my background is not in fire, but I think some of the operations decisions that were made on this fire were based over that concern as well.
Right, right. And when they still might not hold that north end just because of the fuels conditions. I think,
Yeah.
that some of these projects, they end up feeling almost impossible to pull off. I don't know how well we understand what we're trying to do. When we're going to put low severity fire into a place that's had high severity fire in the past, you know,
Yeah.
um, how did you guys kind of go about, having these conversations about like developing your prescription, the level of mortality you wanted? What were your objectives for this project?
Malcolm and I are actually going to do a flyover on Sunday, so we'll have some eyes on what the project area looks like post fire. But one of the reasons CWI got involved in this project is because it is on an experimental forest, and the research that this forest has produced, specifically around prescribed fire, is world renowned. And so Malcolm, I think, really, because of the research that he's been doing over the last couple of decades on prescribed fire, really had a clear understanding of what this forest needed. And that informed the way the prescription was written. And it's interesting, researchers who have ongoing research projects in these forests, they're heartsick for a few days and then they pivot. Right, this happened. We're gonna look at it a different way now, and I think Malcolm is probably approaching it in a similar way. But that link between research and practice and research and policy is why CWI got involved in this project, because the organization wasn't intended to be an implementation focused organization originally. So all of that to say, when in terms of the way this burn was approached and the scale of it, it was really informed by the researchers involved in it. And Scott, you want to talk about specifics?
Yeah, so it was developed, the burn plan itself was developed, kind of based on Ben Jacobs' knowledge and experience in burning in that area and in that terrain for a long time. You mentioned Calaveras, big trees. I think that was one of the things that were attracted, and then we had other folks kind of providing input and an objective lens from the Forest Service, current members of Forest Service. But one of the things that drew CWI and myself to this project were exactly some of the things that you're mentioning, Zeke. Kind of like what is the research and how do we know kind of what the effects of that are? And that is one of the powerful things about the tea kettle is there's been so much research done on it. There's so much knowledge and information there. And even though this was a very specific implementation project, Malcolm and all the researchers involved in the Teakettle had a bunch of research happening around it. One of the big things that kind of blew me away when I first went down there and met with Malcolm was talking about, the duff layers around the base of these big trees and that being, potential responsibility for cooking off some of these big trees, essentially girdling them. And so they have a project that they're raking a portion of the bottom of the trees to see how that affects, fire moving through there and not, not having such a severe impact to some of these larger trees. So there's all sorts of research around this project that Malcolm could really talk more about.
I do want to call out, just as we're talking about these big trees, largest intact stand of old growth outside of the park system. It's also a culturally significant area for the tribes, and CWI has developed relationships and was working towards finding pathways for like the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative. That is a cooperative of local community organizations and tribes focused on cultural and prescribed burning initiatives, trying to get them onto not only the burn itself, but also doing some of the prep work. And the Garnet blowing through this area it has a big impact on the tribes. There's even an origin of fire story very close to the Teakettle as well. So just want to call that out.
All right. So do you think that we're going to get this kind of stuff done like elsewhere? Like when you look at the map of like how much of the Sierra is burned up, like from my perspective, the Forest Service and even CAL FIRE, everyone's talking a big game about putting fire on the ground. And it's just the support's not there. It's not happening anywhere. I feel like industrial timber companies gave up on the Forest Service as a reliable partner in the 1990s because they recognized that if they counted on the Forest Service as a stable partner and kept running mills in places where they required, the Forest Service to deliver logs, that they were going to go bankrupt. And so they completely bailed. And I wonder, the conservation community has not. But in the meantime, in the last 25 years, the conservation community, all of us have invested a huge amount of time and energy in planning and trying to work with the Forest Service. And then they talk a big game, but nothing ever happens. Right. And so how long does conservation keep pretending that the Forest Service is a good partner? I'm sure you guys have positive partnership relationships, individual relationships with people that have helped you get this project together. But when it comes down to it, like as soon as this is a wildfire, we're going to spend $1 million a day. We're no NEPA required. We're going to put in dozer lines. We're going to do whatever we want. But 0% of that enthusiasm, freedom, funding, trust in the people on the ground pans out for things like prescribed fire. So how long do we keep pretending that that we can make this happen when there's absolutely zero real support on the ground from the highest levels to make it happen?
I mean, I think that is the most important conversation that is coming out of this experience for me personally with the Teakettle and with this burn plan is exactly the questions that you're asking. And that's a big reason why we're doing the storytelling around this and really identifying like, hey, what are the institutional barriers? Not just keep banging your head against the same brick wall, but like, let's also be working on those institutional barriers and figuring out creative solutions to those as well. And I don't think you completely fall off of doing the implementation work. I don't think you ever step away from that, no matter how frustrating it is and how big of a waste of money it seems. Like I don't see how you can walk away from that. I think you have to keep after it if you want to see a positive change. How can we leverage individual partnerships that set up a longer term relationship and a longer term trust so then we can move forward with some of these bigger projects? When I started off this project, one of my big concerns is my background in implementation was working with nonprofits that wouldn't do prescribed fire because of the liability, either through the insurance or the risk aversion of the board or of the leadership team weren't willing to engage we're doing lots of big projects, but weren't willing to engage in putting fire on the ground. And so one of the first things I did is start reaching out to other organizations to find out how they were doing that. And a lot of organizations were like, we can't, because of the same reasons, the risk and tolerance of either insurance or an organizational leadership, or if they did have the backing of that. But I had organizations tell me like, yeah, we don't do that on the Forest Service because of the institutional barriers there. And why I appreciate that, that's not a solution. That's not going to get us to where we want to be. Like, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
One of the
I can't see walking away from it.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I think about when I started my career in the late 90s, um, we were burning in Eastern Oregon really large tracts, and granted, entirely different ecosystem, but we had that institutional knowledge of how to put fire on the ground as a Forest Service crew. There were a lot of crews, a lot of resources with the Forest Service that had that knowledge, and that knowledge has somewhat fallen away. And while that's fallen away within the agencies themselves, it's starting to build up outside of those agencies
Hmm.
with the nonprofits, with the burn associations, and so on. But now we have an agency that is so used to not trusting anyone outside of the agency or that institutional mindset, um, sort of being superseded in knowledge by organizations outside, that it's hard to kind of like mesh those together. And so one thing that I was really interested in is like understanding how to develop those relationships, not only how to develop those relationships and build that trust, but how to accelerate trust. Because we always say we can only move at the speed of trust, and trust takes a long time to build. Well, how do we move that along more quickly so that we can do this implementation work at scale? Um, and
Yeah.
it's cultural in many ways, but we need to reconcile that.
But it's physical too. I think like, tea kettle burned this week and next week it might be too wet to burn. Right. And so like, when's
Yeah,
your window? Your window in tea kettle might actually be August, burning from the top down, but no one is, after the memory of what tea kettle did in the first week of September, like no one's willing to burn in fire season.
yeah,
And so I think a lot of our hang up with getting fire done at scale is just that we have these definitions of what prescribed fire season looks like. Okay, it's after 2 inches of rain in September. And it's like, well, after 2 inches of rain in September at 7,000 feet, nothing's going to burn again.
yeah,
So a lot of the stuff is so far beyond our control. Like institutionally, no one's going to let you burn in August. They'll say you can burn in October and then you can't get it done for 10 years. Like that's what we're running into on the Tahoe. So,
yeah,
I think that's why I question like, okay, it's really easy to talk about putting fire on the ground at scale, but oftentimes the fire's not even going to carry at scale unless you burn in fire season,
yeah.
right? Especially in the red fir, the high elevation landscapes.
One of the things that I noticed when I was working on the Smoky Generation, the oral history, Wildland Fire oral history project I developed, was I noticed that people who began their careers during the Great Yellowstone fires in '88, they witnessed the political fallout from the let burn, quote unquote, let burn policy, right? They saw how these managers were just skewered in the press and politically. And those seem to be the same people that were the most reticent to burn when they got into management positions later in their career. And that's one of my fears with some of these larger prescribed burns that have escaped and chewed through towns. Or in other cases where people might be bold and put fire on the ground in August, is that if something goes wrong, all of a sudden we've got an entire generation of fire.
Yeah, and in the meantime, the landscape is changing, right? So
Exactly.
by the
Yeah.
time that, maybe we get progress and we start letting lightning fires burn, by that time, maybe the whole Yuba watershed will have burned. So as the policy is regressing away from using prescribed burn and letting, lightning fires burn, like the whole chessboard is being reworked.
Yeah. 100%.
But it makes it hard for me to want to get invested in multi-year planning projects at this point because I don't feel like even if you guys have been successful in getting your planning work done, that necessarily your project would have ever gotten done just because of these things we're talking about.
I think that's one of the reasons why CWI is also working on policy change. And, there are a lot of really amazing people that are trying to move that needle. And I think that effort needs to continue to be supported and funded, because until these constraints change, we're going to we're going to hit our heads against them, I think.
Look, we wouldn't be on this call having this conversation with you if it wasn't a funded project. This would just be another fire through an unfortunate forest. So
Right.
I think like not wanting, I get it, not wanting to engage, but like if we're not engaged, we're not telling the story, we're not capturing this, and we're not moving the needle.
Okay, back to talking about CWI and trying to push policy change. I looked at your website, and your board of directors is 7 PhDs, a fire chief, and a political strategist. And then your advisory board is a fire chief, a fire administrator, um, a techie, and Bethany Hanna. And so where's the like what's the political strategy? Like where are the loggers? Where are the kind of root down prescribed fire people? Like is CWI it's a think tank, right? But like loggers think too. And like lots of people think, but just like and might not have a PhD. So why are you guys so heavy on the academics? Like where's that fit in with like trying to make things actually happen on the ground?
So CWI is still a very young organization, funded in 2021. And it was founded by primarily, like, the board that you're seeing now is still very much the founding board. But as the organization grows, the founding board, as with all organizations, the founding board will start to rotate off. And Marissa, who's the executive director, is actively working on developing that board. And I think as that happens, you'll start to see different skill sets and voices come into play. And I know that she's actively having conversations with people now, and with people that I am really excited to see step into those roles. I personally, I run nonprofits. I've been involved in startup nonprofits a couple times over. And one of the sort of guiding principles of a good board is that you seek out the three W's: wisdom, work, or wealth. Wisdom is what you see on our board right now. Wealth isn't necessarily wealthy people, but people who have access to wealth or are willing to open those doors. And wealth, in meaning philanthropy or grant funding and that sort of thing. And work is like, maybe you have an attorney on the board who's willing to help with contracting and that sort of thing. So actively doing work. We're heavy on the wisdom, and to round out the sort of a good nonprofit governing board, you need to add different perspectives and different skills to be able to move the organization forward.
Okay, so one of the big questions my listeners have is, do you guys have to give back the money? Like, what happens now? Like, you've got $6 million to burn a forest that's burned. What happens to the rest of the grant?
Yeah, and again, we started these conversations with the Cal Fire last year when the Basin Fire kicked off, and have already, started the conversations as the Garnet Fire happened. We've got initial support from Cal Fire to continue to use that money, and how we use that money is obviously going to have to change, but not necessarily giving it back, like refocusing the project, refocusing the geography. I think we've got opportunities that we're still trying to sort through. It's still pretty early in that process, but our intent and our hope is to continue to do some good work with that money.
Okay, and then the money was funded by polluters, right? By the California Climate, what is it, CCI?
Investment.
Right.
Investment.
So polluters like Chevron, refinery operators, they have to pay a tax on carbon. And this money is supposed to go into projects that help sequester carbon. And is the grant paying for your time right now to talk to me about this?
No, in fact, I'm on vacation,
Yeah,
visiting
Dang.
not me.
visiting my family.
So, I've seen research that says that dead forests still sequester a lot of carbon. Those big trees are going to stand there for a long time. They're not going to sequester carbon for centuries. Um, what do you guys think of this kind of carbon overlay to all this work. Like, isn't it enough just to like preserve old growth because it's freaking amazing? Like, why do we have to like turn it into this like we're pretending that this is actually gonna like be significant at the global scale or something? But I think that most people who like look at the size of like the earth and the atmosphere recognize that like 3,000 acres of trees is like really like a drop in the swimming pool. Um, and I know the money is kind of in carbon, and that's how the whole kind of game is being played right now.
When we first got to go out on the forest and got a pretty amazing tour from Malcolm, who spent decades down there, I was not thinking about carbon. Like I was thinking about how amazing those trees are, how amazing that landscape is. Getting to see some sites that were just uniquely amazing and culturally significant is what is what the loss of that forest for me is, not the carbon, not the
Mhm.
carbon.
I do think, like you said, this is the way the system is set up right now. And see, I used to run a program for the Sacramento Tree Foundation called Urban Wood Rescue, where we took urban trees that were removed from the city and mill it into specialty lumber. And it was also funded through CCI um, money, and we actually calculated how much carbon each log was sequestering, and we counted how many logs we milled each year. And I joked that that you look at that and then you look at the pet food industry and how much carbon um, is being produced by that industry. And I would always joke that with the amount of pets that the Sacramento Tree Foundation staff had compared to how much carbon we were sequestering in the logs, we probably canceled it out. So,
Right.
you're absolutely right. When you really, really, really look at it, it's hard to sort of reconcile these things. But also, what I care about is that there is investment being made in this work, that we've got really good people working on it, and generally good checks and balances with making sure the money is used the way it was for the projects. Is being used in the way it was intended, and that from a like community and landscape resilience, I see some really good projects out there that are doing that, and my hope is that we can build on those and begin to prioritize and do the work that you always talk about, these sort of the jigsaw puzzle. And can we create a more resilient landscape by making sure that these areas are getting treated in the places that are going to have the best impact for the longest amount of time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what, like right now the fire's backing down into Dinky Creek, and I think there's gonna be some interesting kind of good fire portions of the story, even though the spot on the landscape we happen to care about the most really, it looks like parts of it really cooked hot. Man, what a fucking week. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's just it's wild to watch this kind of slow motion, but it seems it's not like it's just routine now to me. Like, I wrote a kind of prioritization project for the South Lassen watersheds that was 850,000 acres between the Feather River and Highway 36. And we spent like 2 years on it. It was a lot of money. And we modeled and we drove around and I hiked in old growth forest with my kids and we wrote a plan and like, hey, we think you could burn here, you could do a fuel break here. We kind of developed, it was kind of pre-pods, but we kind of, used that concept and put a lot of our energy into this. But there was like zero prospect of any of it happening with the Forest Service's capability right now. And then the Dixie Fire, like within months of us publishing that report, the Dixie Fire burned like 600,000 acres of that 850,000 acre planting area. And a lot of it just at high severity. All like most of the old growth that I went out and hiked around. It was during the pandemic, so it was great. I took my 9-year-old and my 11-year-old out, and we like hiked around in these amazing old growth red fir forests, a lot like Teakettle. And that shit just got frickin' destroyed.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, I'm glad we got to see it before it happened. But to me, it's like I'm out. I'm retired from planning because the Forest Service isn't going to do anything with this. And like, yeah, why would I bother? I mean, I'm glad I got to go see it. but I spent years doing stuff like that, and it looks so easy on the map. And then
What
it's just like nothing ever gets done.
what do you think is the solution? What have you been chewing on?
Just fire, just it's gonna all burn. Like it doesn't matter what we do, right? It's like we'll maybe I think the solution is follow-up fires with prescribed burning, taking advantage of the fresh black,
Yeah,
burned in the puzzle.
yeah.
But a lot of places the puzzle doesn't exist yet. So fires like you're getting right now are creating the puzzle. The Yuba River watershed, like it's a million acres, it's the next Dixie Fire. I don't think we're going to prevent it. I think accepting that even high severity fire is it's just the train we're on. And so when I look at like portions of Dixie that looked really terrible after the fire, they're like beautiful black oak regen right now. And
Mm,
there's elk there. And the landscape's really resilient. And I think for us to it's like trying to stand in front of a runaway train. Like the train left the station 100 years ago when we cut down all the big trees and when we started putting out every fire. And there's now we just have to kind of get out of the way and see what it looks like after the train wreck.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can, I'm right on the edge of the Caldor. I can see the scar from all south-facing windows of the house, and I don't know how to do this personally, but all I want to do is get in there in the next 5 years and burn. Because this tiny little community of Kiteburst and Silver Fork is just not only is it going to be written off, but it's going to be forgotten and likely never rebuilt if a fire does burn through here. So
What's interesting
um,
if you look at like the scale at which industrial timberland owners are working, like the Bear
mm,
Fire, the Dixie, like they're working at this huge scale, 100,000 acres of salvage and herbicide and reforestation and so it's not that this stuff is impossible to do, it's just that it's impossible right now for the feds to make it happen.
mhm.
And I think we're in an interesting time where, like there's these huge like National Forest Foundation grants to work in the Yuba, to work in the Plumas. But then we hear that NFF won't burn anything, won't even burn piles because of liability. And so I think it'll be interesting in 5 years to look back at like, okay, what happened to that, several billion dollars from the wildfire crisis strategy? These huge projects that are getting done. Did it make a difference? Maybe it did. Maybe I'm just kind of grumbling here in my shed, you know, out of touch with what's really happening.
That's that's always my fear too.
Yeah.
You can have your finger on the pulse only so much, and um, I mean, thank God there's other work being done in conversations. And, a lot of my work is international. And so I hear some innovations that are happening in other places and especially in emerging fire countries and gives me hope. Um, but I helped work on a paper that sort of examines this concept of like we can, in terms of climate change, but if you have the lens of fire, we can mitigate, we can adapt, and both of those are sort of right on the edge of not being possible any longer with climate change. And the alternative is we can suffer. And so, so my driver right now is how do we lessen the amount of suffering and put it off for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And so, like if I think that's an incredibly like pessimistic way of viewing the world, but if I think about it that way, it gives me the motivation to actually find those projects that are having the impact and try and like accelerate and stimulate and motivate the work out there and support the good innovations, encourage the newcomers to the industry to really engage with practitioners to understand how these solutions should be built so that they can be implemented quickly and keep moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Don't just off yourself because it's so, I mean, I think the survival mechanism is definitely like, for me, the survival mechanism is like, hey, you got to get all right with fire burning wild on the landscape because it's a hurricane that you can't stop. And that there is a lot of beautiful things that come out after a fire, and we have
Yeah.
to learn to focus on those. There'll be
Yeah.
beautiful things that come out in Teakettle. but
Yeah,
but looking to a future with very little old growth is very painful.
it is.
And it's
It's,
played out in my home landscape. Like huge amount of the old growth will never be there again for 500 years.
yeah. How would you how would you tell this story? Zeke, you are telling the story, but in terms of the tea kettle, what is the takeaway you'd want people to have?
Well, it's easy for me to come at it and be like, well, why did CWI get 6 million bucks? Like, who thought that you guys were the experts? But could anyone else have done it better? I'm just trying to tell as many different angles as I can, and I'm trying to weave it into threads that we cover here already, like the futility of managing forests for carbon, the lack of institutional support at the highest levels for the risk associated with prescribed fire, the difficulty in hitting windows, narrow windows, or the impossibility of that, like with our experience on the Tahoe, that, you end out with things that just are not implementable. And so, like, what can we learn about, like, would it be better to try a project like this on the east side?
Hmm.
Um, would it be better to try a project like this at, 5,000 feet instead of 7,000 feet? It's interesting that it's an experimental forest. I think that's the interesting angle. It's like, okay, we've studied this a lot.
I was just gonna say there's a lot of information that come out. Just walking across that forest, like every tree standing, regardless of condition, standing on the ground has a tag on it. Like there's data on all of that, all of that. And
Yeah.
how that will be processed and analyzed after this fire will be I don't know, but I think it could be there's endless amount of information that could be really interesting that could come out of this. I had crews that worked on the cables, the prep for the cables burn in the Calder. And I look at that, I'm like, oh, this can work. This can work. There are examples that do work and do make a difference and an impact. And so if we can just shoot for those,
Hmm.
but I do think you're right. I think looking for the beauty in the black and figuring out how we can leverage that to the best of its ability is also an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it's a tough sell because people are so pissed about the losses and all the narrative about, oh, they just monitored it for, the first day. It's like, no one even knows if that stuff's true, but people decide to embrace the whatever philosophy they have. Oh, the Forest Service, they're at fault because they just don't fight fire anymore. They're just trying to like make money off of suppression, et cetera. Like all this kind of background noise and misinformation makes it so hard to even like find a place to kind of tie this conversation in.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's just this collective grief, right? Like everyone has grief and blame is the first step, right? And
Um,
oftentimes we just don't move past that.
yeah. Yeah.
I think I worry about, like I saw it's National Suicide Awareness Month, right, for firefighting, September, because September is when people start killing themselves because they lose their crew, they lose their sense of purpose, they come home and their family is shattered from them being gone for months and months. But I was thinking that like I feel like in my experience is that like being a firefighter and being asked to go put out all these low severity like simple lightning fires, like once you've spent time burning and like that those fires are doing great work on the landscape, and that when you spend a whole season putting out fires like that, you come back really jacked. Just like it's set up to ruin you, really, because you in your mind, that you're partly responsible for things like this happening. As firefighters, you look at the woods and you see it all choked, and then you're putting out the fire, the little white fir lightning fire that's got like 1 foot flame lengths backing through, killing small seedlings. And I think that we need to talk about that more. Just yeah, like you guys are suffering right now from this sense of loss of what could have been, and that is what firefighters like. They spend their entire lives in that milieu, and
And
like connecting what you're trying to do with the grief and um, finding the hope in it is really hard. I like that you guys have a storytelling lens to your work.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And what you just mentioned, Zeke, is what I am moving into in my work now is I don't want to say culture change, but it is culture change. It's how do we empower wildland firefighters and wildland fire practitioners to um, I call it, suppression action as resilience action. So how can we fight fire in a way that actually builds resilience and achieves suppression objectives? And so much of what we do in the prescribed fire world could translate into that. But we need training that is infused with that resilience mindset. We do need some agency, the political will from the agency to support those decisions. But I spent 6 years on hotshot crews. I burned personally tens of thousands of acres, and it took me 20 years after leaving a hotshot crew to actually fully understand, and I don't know that I do, but fully understand cultural burning, and that you don't just burn to reduce risk. And that's, they always say clean black is safe black. Well, it's safe for that moment, but it actually defers risk to future years. And so how can we build those mindsets into the work that we're doing while we're suppressing fires without having to have those actions qualify as managed fire, right?
Hey,
And I think there's a way. I think there's a way. And I think a lot of it has to do with empowering those firefighters who are experiencing those griefs, who are sitting up on those ridgelines going, why are we even here? And giving them tools and strategies, tactics to be able to do those burnout operations in a way that suppresses the fire, stops it where it needs to be stopped, but builds resilience, landscape and community resilience as they're doing it.
yeah,
And
I also thought,
that's where I'm hopeful.
yeah, I
That's the
also thought
work
it'd
that
be
I
good to
do.
have a page in the IRPG, in the pocket, the firefighter's pocket guide. There's a page that tells you how to refuse an assignment because of risk. And I was like, well, we need a page that tells you how to refuse an assignment because it's freaking stupid, right? And it's like, well, maybe that's where you're going, Bethany. Like you can like work on that curricula. Like, no, we're not doing this. This doesn't make any sense. Because I mean, what if every hotshot crew turned down assignments that were stupid, like hiking down in this hole to put out a fire that's like surrounded by black from a previous fire, like wait, like stuff that happens all the time.
All the
Like,
time. Yeah.
well, that would be action. That would be resilience action right there. Like all the crews say, no, we're not going to do that. It's stupid. And then what are they going to do? They're going to, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the way the system's set up is they'd find another crew who will take the assignment. But for me, it's like we have to empower people to say, hey, that's not something I think we should be doing, but we could be doing this instead, and it would achieve these outcomes. And that's the piece, is like not just saying no, but actually like leading from behind to get the objective. Firefighters in general have such an intimate understanding of the landscape and a fire. Why wouldn't we be depending on their expertise and their knowledge to be able to read that landscape? And one of the reasons why we put together a briefing paper, or sort of a briefing document for the Teakettle, was with the hope that if there were opportunities to go into the Teakettle before the main fire front came in there, to put some good fire on the ground, that they would take it. The fire didn't burn in such a way that where that was possible, but and there's, you've seen the terrain. There was no actual holding line, but we wanted to at least give them an understanding of what our objectives were for the project, and if there were opportunities, just to give them the information and knowledge, because I really do trust practitioners to be the best advocates for that.
Yeah, do what they can.
If given the
What I think we
opportunity.
really need to do that for everywhere, right? Like with the idea
Yeah.
with pods too. It's like, hey, if you're going to put in dozer line, the thing is that people who are drawing the pods already think like ops people as far as,
Mhm.
that's,
Yep. Yep.
but I think
Yep.
that it's not enough just to kind of draw a pod on a map. The next step is like, well, let's go snag that ridge and put fire on the ground there. So we don't have to do that when there's a fire coming up the hill in August.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, our hour is up. Um, thank you guys. Thanks for coming on the lookout. And I'm sorry that your project burned up. And I'm looking forward to hearing what stories you guys can salvage from it.
Yeah, there is a story to tell, for sure. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thanks,
having us.
Yeah, and I'm
Thanks for the
stoked you guys.
opportunity. Appreciate
Yeah, and I'm stoked you guys are working with Sashwa and Coldwater Collective on that storytelling. Those guys are incredible, and really enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, they are incredible. And yeah, we're looking forward to moving this forward and sharing it with the world. I mean, that's the goal here is let's get people thinking about it.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
See you guys all
Thank you.
later.
Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.